Deep in an ancient Indonesian lake, there's a silent war being waged. It's a battle for survival, and the weapon that could actually turn the tide isn't a net or a boat, it's a mathematical equation. Today, we're going to dive into how math is being used to fight an invasive fish and, just maybe, save an entire ecosystem. It really does sound like something straight out of science fiction, doesn't it? But that's the big question we're tackling today. Can a bunch of equations, numbers and variables, actually become a real-world rescue plan for a species on the brink?
All right, so to see if an equation can really be a rescue plan, we first have to understand the crisis it's trying to solve. So let's head to Lake Poso, this incredibly unique and precious place that's now in serious trouble.
Okay, so on the left, you've got our native hero, the Aureus nigrimus, a fish you can't find anywhere else on Earth. And on the right, that's the invader, the Nile tilapia. It's bigger, it's tougher, and it reproduces way faster, which gives it this huge competitive advantage. This right here, this is the heart of the conflict. And this is the stage where it's all playing out. Lake Poso isn't just some random body of water. We're talking about an ancient lake, a biodiversity hotspot that's been cooking up unique species for millennia. It is a genuine natural treasure. The problem itself is pretty simple, but it is absolutely devastating. Those invasive tilapia, which were introduced decades ago, are now just completely taking over the lake. They're just flat out outcompeting the native fish for food, for space, for everything, pushing them closer and closer to disappearing forever. But, this isn't some simple story of a good fish versus a bad fish. The situation is way more complicated than that, and there's a human element here that creates a massive dilemma. You see, while the tilapia are a total ecological disaster, they've also become an economic lifeline. For the local communities who fish the lake, these invasive fish are now a really reliable source of income. So the question becomes, how do you save the native species without taking away the livelihoods of the very people who depend on that lake? It's a huge, huge challenge for conservation authorities. And this is exactly where things get interesting. To untangle this complex web of ecology and economics, researchers turn to something you might not expect. Not a bigger fishing net, but a powerful set of mathematical tools. So they started with a classic from the ecologist's toolbox, the Lotka-Volterra model. The easiest way to think about it is like a mathematical simulation of a tug of war. You've got two species pulling on the same rope, the same food and space, and these equations predict how the population of one species affects the other. But for a place as complex as Lake Poso, the basic model just wasn't going to cut it. They had to add way more detail. So instead of just treating all the fish as one big pile, the researchers did something really smart. They broke each species down into two separate groups. Juveniles, that's the X1 and Y1 you see, and adults, X2 and Y2. And this is absolutely crucial because the pressures on a young fish are totally different from the pressures on a grown one. This little detail makes the whole simulation much, much more realistic. Now, the model has a ton of variables, but let's just focus on three really important ones. Beta and eta are basically the damage factors. They measure just how much harm the invasive tilapia are doing to the native fish, both the young ones and the adults. But the most important variable of all is U. This one represents the harvesting effort, basically how many tilapia are being fished out of the lake. This is the one thing humans can directly control. So the entire investigation really boils down to this one question. Can we tweak U just right to save the native species? By running all the numbers through this model, the researchers could actually start to predict the future. Their work laid out 4 possible long-term outcomes for Lake Poso, 4 potential destinies depending on the conditions in the water. And here they are. E0 is the worst-case scenario, total extinction, a dead lake. E1 is the dream conservation outcome, only our native fish survive. E2 is the nightmare, where the invaders win completely. And then there's E3, coexistence, where both species just kind of manage to hang on. The goal, obviously, is to figure out how to push the lake from where it is now towards that ideal E1 state. So where is the lake right now? Well, the model shows that with the current level of fishing, what the model calls U equals 1, the lake is stuck in that coexistent state. But it's a really fragile piece. The native fish population is constantly under threat, and it's slowly but surely losing ground. This basically told the researchers that just coexisting wasn't going to be good enough. They needed to find a tipping point, some kind of hidden lever they could pull to fundamentally change the lake's entire future. So the whole investigation really narrowed down to one single critical question. What is the exact amount of fishing pressure we need to apply to get rid of the invasive tilapia for good and let the native species finally recover? And this chart right here is where we find the answer. It's called a bifurcation diagram. Now, I know it looks a little complex, but the idea behind it is actually pretty simple. As we move from left to right along that bottom axis, we're cranking up U. That's the fishing pressure on the tilapia. The lines show what happens to the populations of both fish as that pressure gets stronger. And you can see at low levels of fishing, both species are coexisting. But as we keep increasing that fishing pressure, something pretty dramatic is about to happen. And boom, right there. The model spits out the magic number, 1.424. This isn't just another data point. This is the tipping point. This is the clue that cracks the whole case wide open. So, what does this number actually mean? It means that if the local authorities can increase and, importantly, maintain the harvesting of tilapia to a level just above this threshold, the entire dynamic of the lake flips. The invasive species just can't sustain its population anymore, and it heads for extinction in the lake. To put it simply, you can think of the lake as a bucket. The native fish are trying to stay in, but the invasive fish are like a giant leak. This number, 1.424, tells us exactly how fast we need to scoop out the leak to stop the native fish from running out. It's a specific, measurable target. And here is the proof. These graphs simulate what happens over time. Now first look at the yellow and blue lines down at the bottom. That's what happens with the current lower fishing effort. The populations just kind of bump along in that fragile coexistence. But now look at the purple and green lines. That's where the harvesting rate O is pushed above that critical 1.424 threshold. And look what happens. The invasive tilapia population completely crashes. And the native fish? Their populations, which were being suppressed, now have room to recover and thrive. The math is literally predicting a complete victory. So what started out as a bunch of abstract equations has now become something incredibly real and tangible. A calculated, science-based rescue plan for an entire ecosystem. So what does this all mean for the people on the ground at Lake Poso? Well, the model gives them a clear verdict. The threat is very real, and to save the native fish, consistently removing the invasive tilapia isn't just a nice idea, it's a quantitative necessity. This gives local authorities an incredibly powerful tool. Instead of just guessing how much fishing is enough, they now have a specific target to aim for. It lets them create a real science-based strategy that can hopefully save a priceless natural heritage, while also supporting the local economy. And that leaves us with a final thought. The story of Lake Poso really shows us that sometimes the most powerful tools for conservation aren't just boots on the ground, but algorithms running on a computer. It really makes you wonder, right? What other complex environmental puzzles are out there just waiting for the right equation to come along and help solve them?